Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's crucial topic, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our content. Today, we're exploring something that affects everyone, but few people fully understand: why the global economy seems to be falling apart and what the Great Reset really means. You've probably noticed things feel different economically: persistent inflation, recurring crises, growing inequality, supply chain breakdowns, and a sense that the system doesn't work like it used to. Many economists and world leaders talk about needing a great reset to fix fundamental problems in the global economy. But what does this actually mean? Drop a comment below telling me whether you think the current economic system is broken or just going through temporary difficulties. Now let's uncover why the global economy appears to be unraveling and what might come next. The global economy faces fundamental structural problems that have been building for decades. These aren't temporary issues that will resolve with normal business cycles. They're deep flaws in how the economic system operates that threaten its long-term viability. Debt levels have reached unprecedented heights globally. Total world debt exceeds $300 trillion, over 350% of global GDP. Government debt, corporate debt, and household debt have all grown far faster than economic output. This debt accumulation accelerated after 2008, when central banks responded to the financial crisis by making borrowing cheap. Each subsequent crisis has been addressed by adding more debt, creating a dependency spiral. The debt trap creates impossible choices. When debt is this high, raising interest rates to fight inflation risks triggering defaults and financial crises. Keeping rates low to avoid crises allows inflation and encourages more debt accumulation. Central banks are trapped. Every option has severe negative consequences. This wasn't a problem when debt was manageable, but at current levels, there's no good path forward. Productivity growth has stagnated in developed economies. For decades after World War II, productivity grew rapidly, enabling rising living standards. Since the 1970s, productivity growth has slowed dramatically. Despite technological advances, the economy produces less additional output per worker than it used to. Stagnant productivity means living standards can't rise much without unsustainable borrowing. Inequality has reached extremes not seen since the 1920s. The wealth gap between rich and poor has widened dramatically. In the U.S., the top 1% own more wealth than the bottom 90%. Globally, billionaires have increased their wealth massively, while median incomes stagnated. This inequality isn't just unfair, it's economically destabilizing because it reduces consumer demand and increases social tensions. The middle class is shrinking in developed countries. Traditional middle-class jobs in manufacturing have disappeared. New jobs are often either high-paying professional positions or low-wage service work, with less in between. This hollowing out of the middle class creates political instability and reduces the broad-based consumption that drives economic growth. Monetary policy has lost effectiveness. Central banks have kept interest rates near zero for over a decade and printed trillions through quantitative easing, yet growth remains weak and inflation is either too low or too high depending on the period. The traditional tools central banks use to manage the economy seem broken. They can create asset bubbles, but not sustainable growth. Understanding these structural problems reveals why the economy feels broken to so many people. These aren't normal cyclical downturns that recovery will fix. They're fundamental flaws in the system that have been papered over with debt and money printing, but haven't actually been solved. Eventually, unsustainable systems fail. For decades, globalization seemed like an unstoppable force, bringing economic integration and prosperity. Now, globalization is reversing. The globally integrated supply chains that made products cheap and accessible are breaking down, and this breakdown has profound economic consequences. COVID-19 exposed supply chain fragility. When China locked down in early 2020, global supply chains dependent on Chinese manufacturing seized up. Companies couldn't get components. Factories worldwide shut down because one piece was unavailable. Store shelves emptied. The assumption that global supply chains were reliable and resilient proved false. Just-in-time manufacturing created vulnerability. Companies minimized inventory to reduce costs, relying on continuous shipments. When disruptions occurred, there were no buffers. Semiconductor shortages that began in 2020 persisted for years because the system had no slack.
Efficiency was maximized, but resilience was sacrificed. Geopolitical tensions are fragmenting global trade. U.S.-China relations have deteriorated dramatically. Technology decoupling is occurring as countries restrict sharing of advanced technologies. Russia's invasion of Ukraine triggered massive sanctions, disrupting energy and commodity flows. The world is dividing into competing blocs with reduced trade between them. Reshoring and friendshoring trends are accelerating. Companies are bringing manufacturing back home or moving it to politically aligned countries. This increases resilience but also increases costs. The efficiency gains from global supply chains are being reversed, contributing to inflation and reduced productivity. Container shipping and logistics face persistent problems. The pandemic created container shortages and port congestion that took years to resolve. Shipping costs spiked to 10 times normal levels. Even as some disruptions eased, the system remains fragile and expensive. The reliable, cheap shipping that enabled globalization can no longer be assumed. Energy dependency has become a weapon. Europe's dependence on Russian gas gave Russia leverage. The energy crisis following Ukraine invasion showed how interdependence creates vulnerability. Countries are now prioritizing energy independence over efficiency, which increases costs and reduces global integration. Labor arbitrage is diminishing. The wage gap between developed and developing countries has narrowed. Chinese workers cost much more than they used to. Combined with shipping costs and geopolitical risks, manufacturing in low-wage countries is less advantageous. This removes a key driver of globalization. Understanding the globalization reversal reveals that the economic model of the past 30 years, produce where cheapest, ship globally, optimize efficiency over resilience, is breaking down. The new model will be more regional, more expensive, and less efficient. This represents a fundamental shift in how the global economy operates. After decades of relatively stable prices, inflation has returned with a vengeance, reaching levels not seen in 40 years. This isn't a temporary blip. It reflects fundamental monetary problems that threaten the global financial system and people's savings. Money printing on unprecedented scales has occurred. During COVID-19, central banks created trillions in new money. The U.S. Federal Reserve's balance sheet expanded from under $4 trillion to over $9 trillion. The European Central Bank, Bank of Japan, and others did similar money creation. This massive monetary expansion inevitably creates inflation. The inflation tax hits ordinary people hardest. When governments can't or won't raise taxes directly, they fund spending by printing money. This causes inflation, which is effectively a hidden tax on everyone holding currency. Savings lose purchasing power, wages fail to keep up with prices. The middle class and poor are devastated, while those holding assets like stocks and real estate see values rise. Asset bubbles have inflated dangerously. Low interest rates and money printing drove stock markets, real estate, and other assets to record valuations. These inflated asset prices benefit the wealthy who own assets, but make housing unaffordable for younger generations. When bubbles pop, the economic damage is severe, as 2008 demonstrated. Currency debasement is accelerating. Major currencies are losing purchasing power rapidly. The dollar, euro, yen, and pound have all declined significantly against real goods. Gold and other hard assets have risen as people seek protection from currency debasement. Trust in fiat currencies is eroding. Different countries experience different inflation levels. Turkey, Argentina, and others face hyperinflation, with prices rising 50 to 100% annually. Even developed countries see inflation of 5 to 10%, highest in decades. This divergence creates currency instability and makes international trade more difficult. Central banks face impossible trade-offs. Raising interest rates to fight inflation risks triggering a recession and financial crisis due to high debt levels. Keeping rates low allows inflation to persist and accelerate. There's no good option. Either accept persistent inflation or trigger economic contraction. They're trapped by past policy choices. Real wages are falling. While nominal wages have risen, they haven't kept pace with inflation. Workers have less buying power than before, despite earning more dollars. This decline in living standards creates political pressure and social unrest. The promise that each generation would be better off than the last is breaking down. Understanding the inflation crisis reveals it's not a temporary supply chain issue. It's the consequence of decades of excessive money creation and debt accumulation coming home to roost. The assumption that central banks could print unlimited money without consequences has proven false. Restoring price stability will require pain that policymakers are reluctant to impose. Economic problems don't exist in isolation. They create social and political consequences. The economic stresses currently building are generating political instability, social division, and declining trust in institutions that could spiral into serious upheaval. Populism is rising globally. Both right-wing and left-wing populist movements have gained strength across the developed world. Brexit, Trump's election, France's Yellow Vest protests, Italy's political turmoil, and similar movements reflect anger at economic systems that people feel aren't working for them. These movements often reject globalization and established institutions. Trust in institutions has collapsed. Confidence in governments, media, corporations, and experts has fallen dramatically. People increasingly believe the system is rigged against ordinary citizens and favors elites. This erosion of trust makes solving problems harder because there's no consensus on facts or legitimate authority. Generational conflict is intensifying. Younger generations face worse economic prospects than their parents. Unaffordable housing, stagnant wages, crushing student debt, and diminishing social mobility. Many feel the social contract is broken. This creates intergenerational resentment and different political priorities that fragment society. Political polarization has reached extreme levels. In the U.S. and elsewhere, political divisions have become tribal identities rather than policy disagreements. People increasingly can't even agree on basic facts. This polarization makes compromise impossible and governance increasingly dysfunctional. Social unrest and protests are becoming more frequent. From Hong Kong to Chile to France to Sri Lanka, mass protests against economic conditions and governance failures are erupting globally. These movements reflect deep frustration with economic systems that people feel don't deliver prosperity or fairness. Migration pressures are building. Economic desperation and climate change are driving migration from poor to rich countries. This creates political tensions in destination countries, where populations often oppose immigration. The migration pressures will likely intensify, creating more political instability. Authoritarianism is on the rise. As faith in democracy and free markets declines, some countries are turning to authoritarian models. China's state-directed capitalism is presented as an alternative to Western liberal democracy. Economic failure feeds political extremism and authoritarianism. Understanding social and political breakdown reveals that economic problems can't be separated from their political and social consequences. Economic stress creates political instability, which makes solving economic problems harder, creating a vicious cycle. The breakdown isn't just economic, it's civilizational.
The Great Reset has become a controversial term, inspiring both hope and fear. Originally coined by the World Economic Forum, it means different things to different people. Understanding what various groups actually mean by this term reveals the stakes and controversies. The World Economic Forum's vision emphasizes stakeholder capitalism. Rather than companies serving only shareholders, they should serve all stakeholders: workers, communities, environment. This vision includes more sustainable development, reduced inequality, and coordinated global governance. Critics see this as elite control and erosion of national sovereignty. Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, are part of reset proposals. Many central banks are developing digital currencies that would replace or supplement physical cash. Proponents argue CBDCs would improve efficiency and financial inclusion. Critics worry about government surveillance and control over all transactions. Modern monetary theory, or MMT, influences some reset thinking. MMT argues governments that control their currency can't go bankrupt and should spend freely until inflation becomes problematic. This challenges traditional fiscal discipline. Some see it as liberating governments to solve problems, others see it as reckless money printing. Universal Basic Income, or UBI, is frequently mentioned, as automation eliminates jobs. Providing everyone basic income regardless of employment could become necessary. UBI could be liberating or could create dependence on government, depending on perspective. Environmental, social, and governance criteria are being imposed. Investment and lending increasingly factor in climate impact, social issues, and governance practices beyond just profit. This could address important problems or impose ideological conformity, depending on viewpoint. The global economic system is clearly under severe stress, but what happens next? There are multiple possible futures, ranging from managed reform to chaotic collapse to authoritarian control. Understanding the possibilities helps us prepare and advocate for better outcomes. Managed transition is the optimistic scenario. Political leaders recognize structural problems and implement reforms addressing debt, inequality, and sustainability while maintaining democratic governance and market economies. This requires wisdom, cooperation, and public support, all currently in short supply, but not impossible. Muddle through is perhaps most likely. Policymakers continue addressing crises reactively with temporary fixes, more money printing, more debt, modest reforms without addressing fundamental problems. The system deteriorates gradually rather than collapsing suddenly. Decline happens slowly enough that people adapt, but living standards stagnate. Financial crisis and debt reset could force change. If debt becomes unsustainable, defaults and restructuring could occur chaotically or in a coordinated manner. Savings and pensions could be wiped out. This painful reset might create foundation for rebuilding, similar to how post-World War II reforms created decades of prosperity. Hyperinflation is a real risk. If governments continue printing money to pay debts and fund spending, currencies could collapse. This happened in Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. Hyperinflation destroys savings and social order, but eventually forces monetary discipline. Fragmentation into competing blocks seems increasingly probable. The world might divide into spheres, US-aligned, China-aligned, and neutral countries, with reduced interaction between blocks. This new Cold War structure would be less efficient, but might be more stable than attempting to maintain an integrated global system with incompatible values. Technological disruption could change everything. Artificial intelligence, renewable energy, or other breakthroughs might solve productivity problems and create abundance that makes current economic stresses irrelevant. Or technology could worsen inequality and unemployment, accelerating breakdown. Authoritarian alternatives might emerge. If democratic systems fail to deliver prosperity and stability, populations might accept or demand authoritarian governance promising order and efficiency. China's model could spread, or new forms of digital authoritarianism could develop. Decentralization through cryptocurrency and technology might empower individuals. If traditional institutions fail, people might create alternative systems using cryptocurrencies, blockchain, and peer-to-peer networks. This could be liberating or chaotic, depending on implementation. Understanding possible futures reveals uncertainty. We're at an inflection point where the path taken in coming years will determine whether the 21st century brings prosperity and freedom, or decline and conflict. The choices made now matter enormously. We've explored why the global economy appears to be falling apart and what the Great Reset means. Structural problems, including unsustainable debt, stagnant productivity, and extreme inequality, have been building for decades. Globalization is reversing as supply chains prove fragile. Inflation has returned with a vengeance as money printing comes home to roost. These economic stresses are creating social breakdown and political instability. Various groups propose different versions of resetting the system, from stakeholder capitalism to digital currencies to debt forgiveness. These proposals range from sensible reforms to concerning power grabs. The future could bring managed transition, muddle through, crisis-driven reset,
fragmentation, or technological disruption. What's clear is that the economic model of the past 30-40 years, globalization, financialization, debt-driven growth, and asset bubbles, is breaking down. Something different will emerge, either through planned reform or chaotic collapse. The Great Reset, whatever form it takes, is happening whether we acknowledge it or not. This isn't necessarily cause for despair. Previous resets, after the Great Depression or World War II, ultimately led to periods of prosperity. Crisis can force necessary changes that wouldn't happen otherwise. But the transition will be difficult, and outcomes depend on choices made now. Understanding these dynamics empowers you to prepare practically and advocate for better policies. Personally, diversifying assets, reducing debt, and building resilience makes sense. Politically, demanding accountability and supporting policies addressing root causes rather than symptoms could steer towards better outcomes. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the global economy is fundamentally broken or just going through normal cycles? Which version of the Great Reset seems most likely? How are you preparing for economic uncertainty? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this analysis valuable, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with anyone trying to understand current economic turbulence. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you never miss our deep dives into economics and the forces shaping our world. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.